Don Lemon perhaps represents the worst of the corporate media class, and why the corporate media class are so toxic and destructive to the ethics and understanding of a free society. And I think that his recent interview with Vivek Ramaswamy, someone who, by the way, I'm kind of crazy for president, someone who actually retweeted my tweet on this particular issue, thank you, Vivek, his interview with him kind of shows just how toxic the corporate political class is. So I will show all of you a clip that came out very recently in the morning as of the posting of this video of Vivek debating Don Lemon on the topic of gun ownership, particularly on the topic of the historical benefit that Black Americans have had from the Second Amendment. And Vivek contends particularly that the Second Amendment and the NRA have been particularly beneficial in securing the freedoms of Black folks, to which Don Lemon says that's not true. Watch this real quick.
Do you have anything on this before I move on to China?
I don't see what one has to do with the other, but go on. I took up a lot of time with Fox.
Oh, it's fine. We have time.
I don't really see what one has to do with the other, especially consider and using the Civil War to talk about Black Americans. That war was not fought for Black people to have guns. That's not.
That war was fought for Black people to have freedoms in this country. Yeah. Actually, that's why the Civil War was fought.
Okay.
And the sad part about it,
that wasn't fought for Black people to have guns. I think.
Actually, you know, funny fact is, Black people did not get to enjoy the other freedoms until their Second Amendment rights were secured. And I think that that's one of the lessons that we learned.
Black people still aren't allowed to enjoy the freedoms.
I disagree with you on that, Don. I disagree with you. And I think you're doing a disservice to our country by failing to recognize the fact that we have equality before the law.
When you are in black skin and you live in this country, then you can disagree with me. But we're not. You mentioned that we have three different shades of melanin.
Don, I think we have to be able to talk about these issues in the open, regardless of the color of our skin. Black Americans today, to say that, compare that to 1865 and 1964,
I think for you to compare it to 1865 and 1964
equal rights in this country.
Actually, I think it's insulting. Say that again?
Black people secured their freedoms after the Civil War. It is a historical fact, Don. Just study it. Only after their Second Amendment rights were secured.
They were not secured their freedoms after the Civil War.
Second Amendment rights, and they actually got the NRA played a big role in that. But today, Don,
the NRA did not play a big role in that.
Absolutely, they trained Black Americans how to use firearms.
That's a lie. That's not. The NRA did not play a big role in that.
This is just historical fact.
But not historical fact.
The part that I find,
because you say it's historical fact,
the part that I find insulting is when you say today Black Americans don't have those rights after we have gone through civil rights revolution in this country.
You are sitting here telling an African American about the rights and what you find insulting about the way I live, the skin I live in every day.
Here's where you and I have
the
a different
freedoms
point
that
of view.
Black and white that Black people don't have in this country, and that Black people do have.
Well, here's where.
Okay, so as you see, Lemon offers no coherent argument. He offers no specific rebuttal. He simply asserts something, makes a series of non-arguments, and then, in making his non-arguments, feigns moral indignation at what Vivek is saying. Now, this is a very common tactic to people who don't have much information about the topic they're talking about, and also a lot of folks on the left to whom experience is supreme, right? So many of us should understand something, that Don Lemon is a particular person in a particular age and time, and he's one single individual, as is Vivek. But there are ideas that all of us, by virtue of being human beings, manifest through our actions. And Don Lemon himself is not the issue. The issue are the ideas and mentalities represented by his approach to Vivek in this interview. And the mentality, the philosophy behind Lemon's rejection of sound and clear, historically prudent arguments about the nature of Black gun ownership is quite simple. It is the mentality that asserts the subjective will, that asserts one's own private opinion over any and all claims to truth. This is the hallmark of what I call the woke leftist paradigm. Now, as I mentioned in other videos, there's a distinction between woke leftist and regular leftist. Regular leftist, as I mentioned before, are people who hold fast to a few core principles: egalitarianism, communitarianism, this idea of the common good, and also a class-based mindset where they see social and economic relationships through the lens of class as opposed to the much richer lens of individuals. And they have been around for a very long time. The modern iteration of them happened in the 1880s to the 1900s, the progressive era. The woke leftists, they are a more newer phenomenon, and they kind of appropriate old leftist ideas and then convert them with their own paradigm into accommodating intersectional characteristics like identity, sexual orientation, or in this case, race. And then, as opposed to looking outward for the truth, the intersectional woke leftist looks inward and says, whatever someone who bears a certain identity characteristic believes or says, that is their experience, that is their lived experience, and that cannot be attacked or critiqued without you erasing their existence. They tie the search for truth to one's own personal existence. It is true that all of us searched for truth. It is true that truth is essential for us to understand how to live in this world and live well in this world. Not just live, but live well. But it is not true that we get to decide what that truth is. And yet Don Lemon took a page out of that rather corrupt handbook, appropriated it for his own desires here, and manifests it in the statement that Vivek does not have black skin, therefore he cannot tell him what his experience particularly is. Again, this is the insanity of inane subjectivism. And so Vivek understood this, which is why he said that it's important to be able to discuss these issues without appealing to skin color. But then Lemon moves the goalpost. He moves the goalpost and says, well, you're not doing it in a good faith way. Well, it's very clear that Don Lemon has not heard of the Robert Williams, the famous Robert Williams of revolutionary fame, who actually had an NRA chapter called the Black Armed Guard, which was responsible for defending Williams's town of Monroe from the Ku Klux Klan. And in fact, that Black Armed Guard got into a gunfight with the Klan, which eventually led to legislation that made the Klan have to go get permits to protest. Now, those of you who don't know history, the Klan relied a lot, not just on murder and bombing, but also on intimidation. The Klan's entire goal was to intimidate black folks and to get them scared and intimidate all of their enemies, by the way, not just black folks, all of their enemies who went against the collectivist worldview. And so the Black Armed Guard fought up against that with the Second Amendment, and they were a byproduct of the NRA. This is the history Don Lemon does not want anyone to talk about, but this is also the history that is quite clear and that Vivek was referencing. So here is the real bigger picture behind all of this. Many of you may notice that before I talked about how leftism kind of emboldens this subjective sense of belief within man before, and that's really what's happening here with Don Lemon. But there's something else that's happening as well. If you have this sense that what you believe determines what is true, and the characteristics you have also go into that calculation of what is true, meaning that if someone were to attack, quote-unquote, your truth, they're actually attacking your life. If you are to believe that, then it's important to understand that there are other ideas that can interact with this false sense of knowledge, this false sense of truth, and that is aesthetics. There's a reason why Don Lemon said to Vivek Ramaswamy that I have black skin and I live this experience, and you therefore have no right to tell me about my experience because I have black skin. So when you get black skin, then maybe you can come back. There's a reason he said that, because he is blending aesthetics, he's blending tastes with moral judgment. So what do I mean? Well, very simply, all of us have tastes. All of us have things that appeal to our likes, appeal to what sense of taste that we like. For example, most people would grimace at the picture of a burnt bush, a bush or a tree that is just burnt and dead. Most of us would say, ew, we have this sort of gut impulse, because many of us are used to trees or bushes looking lively and full of different leaves and maybe animals in the bush, or whatever kind of things you might see. But seeing a burnt thing, a burnt tree, that's kind of shocking to the senses. And so we would then therefore make a judgment about what we feel about that. Well, Don Lemon kind of did the same kind of thing. He sees these kind of arguments that would assert certain facts that are uncomfortable to him, certain truths that are uncomfortable to him. He sees them solely as matters of aesthetics, and they make him feel this sort of gut reaction, so he then pulls back and refuses to engage in rational discourse. The problem is, this is not just Don Lemon. The problem is, this kind of way of understanding substantive issues has become so commonplace throughout America The problem is, there are entire groups of young people who view very important issues like, for example, race, or like, for example, gun ownership, through the lens of taste and aesthetics, as opposed to the lens of core facts, reason, and empirical evidence, because, again, human beings, we are connected to that what is closest to us. And what is closest to a man than the contents of his heart? Nothing. Nothing is closest to a man than the contents of his heart. It's the closest thing that all of us have, and perhaps the most sacred and intimate thing a lot of us have, because no one has access to the contents of our heart unless we give it to people, which is one of the reasons why legislation that tries to change your behavior is really, really not a good idea in many cases. But that's a different story for a different day. The problem is, here's the bigger problem. Lemon exists in a corporate media environment which feeds this sense of authority that he has on these issues by giving him this perch, by giving him this position of authority, so to speak, to speak about these issues because he's affiliated with CNN, and the brand name that CNN has carries itself throughout the ages, as opposed, well, it doesn't anymore because CNN has a bad reputation, but generally the corporate media has gotten through on its reputation as opposed to anything else, and Lemon is hoping that covers him and sees him through in his arguments. And the problem is, the corporate press is not particularly interested in the pursuit of truth. The corporate press is primarily interested in seducing the masses with content that is oversimplified and devoid of nuance, which is one of the reasons, one of the reasons why you see a lot of this kind of stuff happen in the corporate press. Whether it be the Elon Musk BBC interview, whether it be the Kathy Newman interview, whether it be a lot of any other interview or any other monologue you've seen with the corporate press, whether it be the narratives the corporate press has maintained for a long while, there is not a general interest that the corporate press has in actually feeding society and culture with the tools necessary to understand difficult issues, because the moment you are able to think for yourself and discern issues for yourself is the moment the corporate press is part of the job. Once again, Don Lemon occupies that same environment. So you have leftism emboldening the deepest impulses of man, reducing his rationality and substituting it for emotion and passion. And then you have Lemon integrating that with a sort of using aesthetics as a judgment of sound arguments. Then you have the corporate press, which emboldens both of these things by proximity, essentially, and you get more incidences like this. It's a three-way process. There's more steps, obviously, but this is just what I've seen, what is immediately apparent to me. The best thing that all of us, as people of conscience, as Americans particularly of good conscience, and anyone else who happens to be of good conscience, the best thing for all of us to do is to trust ourselves, to trust our reason, trust the facts, and don't trust charlatans like Don Lemon and others of his ilk that are propped up by the corporate press, that mistake aesthetics for substance, and who would mislead you down a path that suits their narrative, as opposed to a path that walks in light of truth. I want us to have conversations that are very difficult about these issues, but I also fundamentally want people to think. I want people to have the machinery and the tools to think properly about certain issues. And through that thinking properly, I want all of us to be able to develop conclusions that will ultimately lead to the furthering of rational discourse. You can only have rational discourse if you live in a society where people treat reason as a value. And the problem, and I'll close on this, the problem is reason is not treated as a value. Aesthetics are treated as values. Emotions are treated as values. Passions are treated as values. Whenever you see emotional buzzwords used in place of actual substantive discussion on particular issues, you know what people value. When someone says, it's the guns in response to a gun control conversation, you know what people value. When someone says that you have blood on your hands in regards to XYZ, if you support a particular policy position, you know what people value. They're not to say there's no place for emotional reasoning, but there is certainly no place for emotion to destroy man's ability to see the world through clear eyes. That is unique to us through our reason. And of course, Lemon is not only bound by his emotion, he is bound by the role he plays within the corporate press ecosystem, which does not incentivize him to think, does not incentivize him to expand beyond his narrow worldview, and in fact incentivizes the exact opposite. Because otherwise, where would their audiences be? Who would their audiences be? Which is why the corporate press is dying and alternative media is rising. Good on you, Vivek. You did wonderful. And I think that more interviews like this will not only be good for you, but good for the nation as well. My friends, like this video, comment on this video, so share this video, subscribe to this channel. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.